بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Today we have the audiolingual method as one of the big methods of teaching English and the most common ones and historic landmark also in the development of English language teaching methodology over the 20th century. We will look at the features of the audiolingual method. We will look at the advantages of the audiolingual method and the techniques used in the classroom, and we will look also at the disadvantages of this method. You have already watched like a video clip or a movie of a teacher who was using the audiolingual method in teaching English as a foreign language in an adult classroom, in English as a second language classroom, within the course that was edited and presented by Professor Freeman, Diane Larson Freeman. And I hope that you enjoyed watching the video and that you learned from the teacher how to use the audiolingual method. I have also looked at the comments and the feedback that you have written on that video clip, and I replied to some of your comments. I liked some of them. Some of your comments or your feedback were describing what the teacher was doing in the classroom. Some of them were relating the actions and the procedures of the teacher to the theory of the language and the theory of language learning within the audiolingual method. So we start by saying the audiolingual method. From its name, audio means that now it will focus on the auditory skills. The auditory skills will be speaking and listening more than reading and writing. So the features of the audiolingual method, first of all, is that it sees language not as grammar and vocabulary as it has been seen by the grammar translation method, but language is viewed as a set of habits. Language for the audiolingual method is a habit formation that requires repeated exposure to different forms of the language presented in positive and negative dialogues. So a dialogue is the main activity and the main technique used within the classroom. And whoever uses the audiolingual method will be using main dialogues. This is a feature of this that it chooses dialogues more than any other thing. Okay. So this is one important thing about the audiolingual method, that it looks at language as a set of habits that require repeated exposure to specific forms of the language, and these are presented in dialogues. But here, not just dialogues, but positive and negative reinforcements through oral dialogues. كلمة reinforcement هنا مهمة كمان لأنها بتذكرنا بالأساس النظري للtheory of language learning. theory of learning, reinforcement. تذكر إنه في علم النفس أنتوا درستوا نظريات مختلفة، أهمها وأشهرها كان behaviorism اللي هي النظرية السلوكية، لما تكلمنا عن يعني how we view language and how we view learning. So we have behaviorism. Okay. Behaviorism as a theory in language learning and in learning in general includes many sub-theories. One of them is connectionism. Connectionism اللي هي نظرية الاقتران، التعلم بالاقتران، وأشهر الأشخاص اللي كانوا فيهم ثورندايك، وفيما بعد سكينر. وزي ما شفنا قبل كده كانت وزي ما ذكرنا قبل كده انه these different scientists made their experiments on different animals, and they taught us something important, that learning for them starts with a stimulus, يعني وجود مثير, then reinforcement, وجود معزز will trigger a response. التعلم بالنسبة لهم هو a response for a stimulus within the existence of reinforcement. عشان خاطر كده لما ذكرنا of the features of the audio-lingual method, in language is viewed as a set of habits. And these habits are developed or are maintained through excessive through excessive exposure to different forms that are presented in these negative and positive reinforcements. وحسب النظرية إن positive reinforcement يشمل كلمات المديح زي مثلا bravo, very good, excellent. وإن negative reinforcement, negative for making errors. Say that's wrong, try again, or this is not correct, try again. So this is one feature of the audio-lingual method, one important feature. Second, speech is more important than writing. And you may remember that in the video clip that you have watched, the teacher did not write on the blackboard, but at the end of the lesson. So the whole lesson was speech and repetition more than writing. Second, language competence here is emphasizing listening and speaking more than reading and writing. In addition, we have another feature of language in audio-lingual method, which is language is viewed as something that is taught and not taught about. Yani the teacher is teaching the language, not teaching about the language.
دكتور معلش في صوت
Yes.
تيار هوا كده مسامعينش كويس. بس على الصوت شوية.
Okay. So we say in this method, the teacher is teaching the language, not about the language. And the difference between these is that when we teach the language, we teach the skills of the language. When we teach the language, we teach the language skills. Like when we teach about the language, we are teaching linguistics. We are teaching rules. We are teaching explanations and analysis of grammar. And this is not a language classroom. This is a linguistics classroom. So in the audio-lingual method, the teacher is teaching skills, language skills that can be used in different situations, and not teaching rules or details about the language itself or about the grammatical rules in the language. زي ما كان في ال GTM اللي هي Grammar Translation Method. So this is one important difference between them. طيب يضاف لي كده in language is what the native speakers say, not what the grammarians think ought to be said. وده برضو theory of language مهمة. So language is not what is in the grammar books. Language is not what is in the dictionary of words. Language is what the native speakers say, So if they make a mistake in the grammar, this is not a mistake. This is just one way of using the language, and it has to be accepted as correct, even if it is contrary to what is written in the grammar books. يعني لو إن كتاب الجرامر بيقول لازم القاعدة تكون بالشكل ده، لكن الناس أهل اللغة بيستخدموها بشكل مختلف، ما نقولش الناس دي غلطانة ومش عارفة إنجليزي. لا، بالنسبة للأوديو لينجوال ميثود يقول لك لا، ده سبوكن انجلش ليه قواعد وحده فمقبولة وما فيهاش مشكلة. على سبيل المثال، ربما كتير منكم مثلا ما يعرفش إنه إن في قاعدة مشهورة ومعروفة اللي هي نحط A قبل كلمة تبدأ بكونسونانت، ونحط an قبل كلمة تبدأ بفاول، مش كده برضو؟ زي مثلا أقول a pen لكن أقول an orange. طيب لو إن البن نفسه، لو إني مثلا عندي an orange pen، قلم لونه برتقاني من ألوان كويس، an orange pen بالشكل ده، حطيت an علشان اللي بعدها orange بدأ بحرف الأو. طيب لو قلت an elephant، okay. صحيح an elephant، لكن لازم أقول a big elephant، يبقى ما أقولش an big elephant، أقول a big elephant. طيب المشكلة إن هناك بعض الناس من النيتيف سبيكرز في اليونايتد ستيتس وفي الأكاديميانز بيقولوا an big elephant بالشكل ده، بيحط an حتى لو إن اللي بعديها big مش elephant. فتقول لهم انتوا كده بتخافوا الإنجليزية بتاعتكم وبتقولوا حاجات غلط، احنا هنعلمكم انجليزي بقى من اول وجديد ولا ايه؟ فالايديولينجوال ميثود تقول لك ما دام النيتيف سبيكر قال كده يبقى الكلام ده صحيح. بس ده مخالف للي في كتب الجرامر. كتب الجرامر دي هي اللي بتعمل لنا حاجه اسمها البريسكريبتيف ابروتش، اتكلمنا عنه قبل كده في محاضره من المحاضرات. لكن الاوديولينجوال ميثود هتستخدم الديسكريبتيف ابروتش، انها تصف ايه اللي بيقولوه الناس. لو انا اعلم لغه عربيه مثلا لغير الناطقين باللغه العربيه وهعلمهم اللهجه المصريه، فاللهجه المصريه هقول لهم النفي عند المصريين لما بينفوا باستخدام أداة ما باللغة العربية. يعني في ما، يعني مثلا ما ذهبت إلى المدرسة، كده فصيحة، ما ذهبت إلى المدرسة. المصريين في اللهجة بتاعتهم بيستخدموا ما هم كمان، لكن بيستخدموها بطريقة خاصة. إيه هي الطريقة الخاصة؟ إنه إذا كان هينفي الفعل هيقول ما زائد الفعل زائد شين. إذا كان هينفي الاسم هيستخدم ما زائد شين زائد الاسم. زي مثلا يقول ما أكلتش، فما أكلتش دي هي في الحقيقة ما زائد أكل أو أكلت زائد الشين. مش عارف هي في الحقيقة ما زائد الشين زائد عارف، وعارف ده اسم. دي قاعدة موجودة في العامية المصرية، ممكن المصريين نفسهم ما يعرفوهاش إن دي قاعدة، لكن هي قاعدة موجودة ومضطردة وبشكل كبير، ولو حد غير فيها بيبقى لهجته مش طبيعية. يعني لو واحد قال مش أكلت الناس هتستغرب عليه. فالكلام ده اللي أنا قلته اللي هو ميم زائد ما زائد الفعل زائد شين مش موجود في أي كتاب نحو يحترم نفسه في اللغة العربية. يعني الكلام ده مش موجود في كتب النحو العربي. أيوة مش موجود في كتب النحو العربي، لكن أهل اللغة بيستخدموه. أهل اللغة موجود عندهم، أهل اللغة كل يوم بيستخدموها بشكل دائم. الأوديو لينجوال ميثود تقول لك مالكش دخل بإيه اللي موجود في كتب الجرامر، شوف الناس بتقول إيه وهو ده الجرامر اللي تتعلمه وهو ده الجرامر اللي تعمل له دريل وتكرار وتأكيد عشان تعرف. فهو ده معنى فكرة إن language is what the native speaker say, not what is in the grammar box or what the grammarian thinks that should be said. Language is also an organism that is different from one language to another. يعني different languages are different in so each language has its own properties and its own distinctive way of teaching. يضاف لذلك in language in the audio-lingual method is a sequence of skills, and the sequence of skills starts with the natural order of language acquisition. So a student is like a child who acquires language first by listening, not by reading. After listening, speaking. After speaking comes reading, and finally comes writing. And you may remember that in the clip, in the video clip that you have watched, the teacher started with listening. They were listening to the teacher, acting the dialogue, and they were repeating after the teacher in the speaking. And finally, there was some pieces of writing. Language in the audio-lingual method is also a foundation. So grammar is not taught directly. Grammar is taught inductively. قلنا قبل كده inductively يعني indirectly. Inductively means indirectly. So rather than giving the rule to the teacher, to the student directly, the teacher will not give the rule, but the teacher will give different examples, and the student will try to infer the grammatical rule himself or herself. And vocabulary is not presented in lists like the grammar translation method. Vocabulary is presented in context, and the context is cultural and linguistic. والطريقة دي بالتالي ما بتستخدمش النيتيف language in the instructions وما بتستخدمش translation إلا في أضيق الحدود في خصوص الابستراكت words، كلمات اللي هي مش ممكن نعبر عنها بالرسومات ولا باللوحات ولا بالرسم ولا بغيره. دي بنعمل لها مثلا translation زي مثلا كلمة freedom أو patriotism أو love. بعض الكلمات زي كده بيبقى صعب إن احنا نعبر عنها بالreal objects. دي اسمها abstract words وعكسها تبقى concrete words. طيب. In addition, this method uses audio-visual aids in order to enforce comprehension. تتذكروا إنه in the video clip the teacher used a vacuum cleaner, a real vacuum cleaner. الأشياء اللي هي حقيقية دي بنقول عليها real objects، و real objects بنستخدم لها كمان كلمة realia. realia هي جمع كلمة رياليوم اللاتينية واللي معناها real object، فالجمع هو ايه رياليا والمفرد هو رياليوم معناتها real object. Sometimes we can use flashcards. We can use also drawings, charts, pictures, actions, and miming. Miming يعني acting without sound. Acting. Okay. So the audio-lingual method overuses the audio-visual aids in order to enforce comprehension and understanding. There is also mimicry and memorization of language 2 patterns. وهتلاقوا انه في الفيديو كليب اللي شفتوه most of the activities are just repetition drill. So احيانا بنسمي الطريقه دي كمان نطلق عليها اسم mim and mim. mim and mim يعني mimicry يعني imitation and mem يعني memorization. Memorization, the students memorize the dialogue and they also imitate the teacher in pronouncing the dialogue. The class is teacher dominated. The teacher is directing the students. The teacher is making the activities. The teacher is a model for the students, and the students are just repeating and imitating the teacher. And the teacher is very active. The students are directed by the skill training and by the skill teacher. In this method, the structure is very important more than the meaning. The meaning will be deduced from the context, but the structure is very important. So they focus on the accuracy of the sentence in the dialogue. برضو ذكرنا قبل كده في محاضرة سابقة الفرق بين كلمة accuracy و fluency. So accuracy means correctness. Correctness in grammar and pronunciation. So if students make a mistake, the teacher will stop them and ask them to repeat again and again and again till they make the correct pronunciation and they grasp the correct structure. وده يذكرنا بأن الطريقة بتقول إنه قائمة على الاستراكشراليزم، نظرية الاستراكشراليزم اللي هي البنائية البنيوية، واللي كانت بتشوف إن grammar in language is a set of patterns، يعني مجموعة من الأوزان والأنماط والأشكال اللي من ممكن إنه نستخدمها في مواقف مختلفة. يعني ممكن أقول مثلا I went to the market to buy food. جملة زي كده I went to the market to buy food أقدر ببساطة شديدة أغير كلمة market وأغير الverb واستخدم الباترن الموجود، فأقول I went to the school to learn English، وأقول I went to the hospital to visit the patients، وهكذا. يبقى عندي باترن واحد وبستخدمه استخدامات كثيرة مختلفة. So language for them is a set of patterns, and students, if the students learn the pattern, then they can produce an infinite number of sentences, of correct sentences. So they need to know about the patterns. Okay. So the structure is very important. Also for them, mastery is very important. Mastery يعني accuracy، يعني very correct, a very correct production of the language. No single error is accepted. So they have excessive drills. دائما كلمة drill زي ما قلنا كان drill يعني الشنيور، والشنيور هو أداة بنستخدمها مثقاب بنعمل بها ثقوب، لكن طريقة عمل الثقوب دي بأنه التكرار في الضغط على الحيطة لغاية ما تعمل الثقب من الثقب. drills and repetitions are very important in this method. So accuracy is the primary goal. The native-like pronunciation is very important, that they pronounce like the native speaker. تفتكروا المدرس في الفيديو كليب كان مهم جدا عنده انه the students will do exactly like the dialogue، حتى لو كان في oh يروح يخليهم يعملوا repetition لكلمة oh. with different stress patterns with intonation exactly as they are doing this. And errors are not accepted. They are prevented at all costs. So whenever there is an error, the teacher tries to correct it directly and firmly and instantly. Okay. So this is in general the audio-lingual method. Based on this, we have advantages for this method. The advantages start by it promotes fluency in speaking the second language, because if students will have the accuracy in the pronunciation and they make the memorization of the dialogue, then they can carry out the dialogue in different situations very fluently without thinking. They will just question and answer without thinking, because they have memorized the dialogue and they have perfected its pronunciation. In addition, this method presents and practices and acquires the structural patterns. زي ما قلنا in the patterns, one pattern can yield or can produce endless number of correct sentences. So they need the patterns. الباترنز هنا مش معناها rules of grammar، ولكن معناها الصيغ المختلفة اللي ممكن أطلع شبيه بيها وتبقى هي دي الجرامر الاندكتيف أو بشكل غير مباشر. It also encourages the improvement of the auditory memory، فكرة الذاكرة السمعية and the auditory discrimination، يميز الطالب ما بين الأصوات المختلفة والستريس باترنز والتون والرايزنج تون والفولينج تون والintonation. This is a very important ability and skill that is promoted for the students in this method. Okay, also still with the advantages, this method provides learners with a sense of achievement and active involvement in the learning experience, because they all the time are repeating, and all the time they are making the drill, and all the time they are imitating the teacher and taking the teacher as a model for them. So they have this kind of achievement, they have done something. The learners receive individualized attention from the teacher. فعشان خاطر كده drill مش all the class all the time، لكن sometimes the teacher focuses on one single student and tries to correct the pronunciation and the pattern and the sentences for them. And sometimes we have caller responses، يعني group responses from the students. الطريقة دي كمان كان فيها حاجة ظريفة وغريبة، وهو إنه معظم المدرسين كانوا native speakers عشان يبقى موديل، لأنه مش هيتكلف في إنه ينطق نطق غريب، لأن ده نطق الطبيعي بتاع بلده. So the native speaker was the teacher. طيب إحنا ما عندناش native speakers يكفوا كل فصول تعليم اللغة الإنجليزية في العالم. فكانت الطريقة دي تقول the teacher should be a native speaker or a near native speaker. طب if we do not have a near native speaker or a native speaker, what should we do؟ كانوا يقولوا use a language lab. فظهرت فكرة معامل اللغات، ما كانتش موجودة قبل كده، language laboratory. language lab هو معمل في زمان، يعني كان جهاز كاسيت بتحط فيه شرايط الكاسيت وفيها أصوات النيتيف speakers and the students have to listen to them and repeat after them. حاليا language labs مش هي الشائعة ولا المستخدمة، لأن digital language labs are available and students can listen to original and authentic native speakers speaking together over the internet. They don't need to go to a language lab. لكن فكرة اللانجوج لابس دي كانت مستخدمة، مش عارف انتوا يعني مرت عليكم او شفتوها ولا لا. لكن خلينا نوريكم شكل يعني language lab ممكن تشوفوه تستفيدوا بيه. لحظة واحدة. Okay. Okay. Okay, this is a language lab, and this is a traditional language lab where students used to have headphones or on their heads and on their ears, and they listen to cassette tapes. Today, as I said, we are having more of a digital language lab where the students are using the internet and the computers more than the cassette tapes. نرجع نشوف هنا. So this is the laboratory or the language lab. Reading and writing, although they are not the focus or they are not the main goal and the main focal point for the audio-lingual method, they are not neglected either, but they are kept to the end of the classroom activities. Okay, the disadvantages of the audio-lingual method. So we have looked at the features of the audio-lingual method, we have looked at the advantages of the audio-lingual method, and now we look at the disadvantages of the audio-lingual method, especially as you have seen it in the Okay, so I say that we have looked at the features of the audio-lingual method and how it views language and how it views learning, and we looked at the advantages of the audio-lingual method, and now we look at the disadvantages. The disadvantages of the audio-lingual method are that the first, that the students may seem to progress and train well on the external features like pronunciation and structure, but in fact, sometimes they do this without comprehension. Yani, the teacher in the video clip that you have seen or that you have commented on, they kept repeating, but we don't know whether they understand or not. There is no comprehension check. ما تأكدش هم فاهمين معنى الكلام ده ولا لا. He was mainly focusing on repetition, correct pronunciation, and correct patterns, and correct mimicry, without making sure that they comprehend or that they acquire the meaning. And you remember in the first lecture, we said that the 4 language skills should maintain and sustain comprehension and understanding. عشان خاطر كده ما كانش كفايه ان نقول عليهم listening, speaking, reading and writing, ولكن قلنا listening comprehension, we reading comprehension, we speaking expression, writing composition. So one disadvantage of the audio-lingual method is that it does not make a comprehension check to tell us whether the students are repeating and imitating with comprehension or without comprehension. Sometimes the material itself can be easily memorized, but some other times the materials will not be as easy as the other materials. Some of the materials will be easily transferred to different contexts and different situations, and others will not be transferred. يعني انت شفتوا مثلا في الفيديو كليب كان of a salesperson or a salesman trying to sell a vacuum cleaner to a housewife. But this is a good situation, this is a good dialogue. Like in real life, we don't have this dialogue every day. And you may not use it if you are not selling something or if you are not dealing with a salesperson who goes to houses. So some of the dialogues are transferable and some of them are not. A third disadvantage is that Memorization and mechanical drills can sometimes cause boredom. الطفل ولا الطالب ممكن يمل من كل شوية repetition، كل شوية drill. Sometimes they may also have fatigue، يتعب، or distaste، يقرف، أو lack of interest، يقول ما وراناش حاجة غير كل شوية نكرر الكلام ده. So it sometimes can be suitable for young children, but for older children or older students, it might not be suitable. Also, it requires an innovative and resourceful teacher to handle it successfully. مش كل المدرسين يقدروا يدرسوا بيها بشكل ناجح، لأنه they need to be near native speakers of the language, and they need to keep the classroom atmosphere lively and very active with the students, so that they do not have this type of boredom or fatigue. It might not be effective for adult learners, especially in certain cultures that are sensitive for drilling and miming. يعني لو حضرتك اتخرجت وما تعينتش في مدرسة زي معظم الناس يعني، واشتغلت في معهد من معاهد اللغات أو مركز من مراكز اللغات. You will be dealing mainly with adults، ستات ورجالة كبار جايين يتعلموا لغة إنجليزية. If you tell them repeat after me زي ما كان المدرس بيعمل كده each word and each phrase and each sentence and the whole conversation, sometimes some ladies will find it sensitive and awkward, and they may not be able to repeat after you all the time، وخصوصا لو حسوا إن في مثلا كلمة بيغلطوا فيها دايما، أو صوت مش قادرين يظبطوه بشكل كبير. It will not be effective because the adult learners will not be as cooperative as the young children, especially with drilling and miming. يعني it might not be suitable in the Arab culture. طيب, in the language classroom we have a mixed ability language classroom students. So we have the high achiever, we have the average student, and we have the low achiever. The talented students will not be satisfied. The talented students will get bored by the repetitions and the drills. فكرة كرروا ورايا ورددوا ورايا كل شوية might be suitable for the low achievers or for the average students. Like in the talented student needs more creative activities, not just repetitions and drills, and they need something else to work with. So this is also one disadvantage, which is that it does not care for the mixed ability class students. بنكرر مرة تانية عن incomprehensibility, and sometimes they repeat without understanding what they are saying. Reading. رغم ان احنا قلنا ان reading comes at the end، بس reading في الحقيقة هو اللي هيعيش مع الطالب بقية حياته الدراسية كلها. So reading should have more focus, should have more attention. So for them reading is damaged، يعني مش واخد الوضع الخاص الطبيعي بتاعه. And grammar is presented in isolation and with less attention, and the attention needed for grammar and reading is not the required one. Okay. طيب. So this is in general about the grammar the audio-lingual method. You remember that in the audio-lingual method there are also language games, and the language games will have different types of drills. كلها drills يعني repetitions. لكن الدريلز نفسها في audio-lingual method can sometimes they are يعني perfect drills. يعني they are drilling the exact sentence after the teacher. Sometimes they are substitution drills، يعني يشيلوا كلمة ويحطوا مكانها كلمة تاني. sometimes they are completion. Sorry. Oops, what this? ممكن أحيانا يشيل كلمة ويحط مكانها كلمة تاني، زي I went to the hospital يقول I went to the school وهكذا. وممكن تبقى completion. They complete. Completion drills. فاحنا هنعمل دلوقتي substitution drill مناسب لمستواكم، نشوف إذا كان تقدروا تكملوا معانا فيه ولا لا. باعتبارها language game using the audio-lingual method, sample language game. فأنا شايف إن دلوقتي دخل معانا حوالي 25 واحد، ف we have يعني a good number to run this game, and so we can start directly. So what is in this game that you look at each number of these, you will find 3 words in each letter in each line. There are 3 words in English. زي مثلا number 4 هنا شايفين كلمة true. هنا true, truly, whole. bank, banks, half. teach, teacher, sail. ايه المطلوب؟ مطلوب انه you try to know the relationship between the first 2 words, and then look at the 3rd word and get the 4th word that has the same relation as the first 2 words. For example, we have bank and banks. This is a noun. الصوت مش واضح.
حضرتك مش واضح.
الآن هل الصوت أوضح ولا لسه ما زال؟
لا كده تمام.
طيب اوكي. So الفكرة بنقول هنا bank and banks. This is a noun and this is a noun. This is a singular and this is plural. Then we have half. فإيه الكلمة اللي تيجي الرابعة؟ So what is the word that we should have after half? يعني bank, banks, half should be what? مين يقول لنا؟ كده احنا دلوقتي هنا في number 5. bank, banks, half يبقى ايه؟ One example هنا في number 1 is the example. Importance, important. Difference, different. Okay? So you drive words based on the relationship between the first 2 words. Importance is a noun, important is an adjective. Difference is a noun، يبقى الكلمة اللي ناقصة هتبقى adjective، فعشان كده ظهرت كلمة different. طيب احنا دلوقتي في number 5. bank, banks, half. ايه الكلمة اللي ناقصة؟
نحط اس الجنب.
يعني اكتب كده كلمة مش عارف اكتب هنا، خلينا اكتب هنا، يعني اكتب نحط اس، يعني اكتب كده هافس بالشكل ده. هل كده اللي قلتيها مين؟ دعاء ولا مين اللي قالت؟ رحاب. الناس متابعة معانا؟ طيب هافس صحيح، لكن السبيلنج بتاعها ما بيكونش كده، لازم هافس هتبقى فيها VES. فهي هنا الفكرة انك انت you know what is the trick in these. Okay. طيب because of the time I will leave the sample game to do at home for your own يعني mental exercise. And we move now to another method, which is TPR, or total physical response. But before we move to that, if you have questions or comments on the audio-lingual method, please make them now. So do you have questions on the audio-lingual methods, or do you have comments? Okay, so we look at the TPR, or the total physical response, by also looking at what is language for them, what is the theory of language and the theory of language learning, what are the advantages and the disadvantages, and we have a video clip to look at and to watch and to comment on. We look at the features. Total physical response, or TPR, from its name, it is mainly about the physical response. So the students will be responding with their own bodies or with their own actions rather than with the oral language or the verbal language. So it focuses, this method focuses on the biological nature of the human brain, the innate biological nature of the human brain, and that language is developed and the sequence of language is developed and enhanced and improved through activating this part of the brain. For them, comprehension precedes production. يعني احنا شفنا في الاوديولينجوال ميثود كان الطلاب يعملوا repetition حتى لو مش فاهمين. So they do production even there is no comprehension. But for the TPR, comprehension comes first, then comes production. فلما المدرس يقول stand up، لو ان الطفل او الطالب ما فهمش he will not stand up. لكن as long as he comprehends and understands the instructions, the student will produce the required action by standing up. So for them, comprehension precedes production. And listening comprehension comes first, followed by reading, writing, and then other skills. فهنا الترتيب مختلف شوية عن الاوديولينجوال ميثود. الاوديولينجوال ميثود كان فيها listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Here, listening comprehension very important. Then after listening comprehension comes reading activities and exercises. Then after that we will have writing and speaking. The utterances and the sentences and the patterns are modeled by physical actions. So the teacher will be doing many actions to the students in order to make them understand what he really means. And the instructions will be clear by the physical actions that are accompanying the verbal utterance. Grammar is taught inductively. يبقى ده اتفاق، جانب اتفاق ما بين الاوديولينجوال ميثود وما بين ال TPR, and for both of them grammar is taught indirectly, and the grammar patterns and the grammar items are selected based on its easiness for the students. طيب كمان نتذكر حاجة مهمة، وهي انه localization. فكرة انه المخ البشري has different areas, and after the studies in anatomy we have come to understand that our brains have different centers. So we have a center for hearing, we have a center for intelligence and personality. دايما الشخصية والذكاء بيكونوا في الجبهة، في الفص الجبهي الأمامي. وعشان كده حتى القرآن الكريم بيصف الجبهة دي، بيقول ناصية كاذبة خاطئة. فالكذب والاحتيال والخطأ كله بيأتي من هذا الجزء اللي هو الفص الجبهي, where we have intelligence and personality. We have also a center for movement, a center for touch, a center for sight and seeing, and we have the brainstem. زي different centers دي, we have also a center for language. We have the left hemisphere of the brain is where the language is lateralized or localized. Localization أو lateralization معناها التموضع. يعني أقول localization يعني متموضعة في هذا المكان، lateralization برضو معناها مجنبة أو موجودة في جانب من الجوانب. تتذكروا في الفوناتكس إن في بعض الأصوات كانت lateral يعني جانبية، يعني تخرج من جوانب اللسان، وهي صوت الله والره. إن صوت الله والره الاثنين عشان if you would like to produce them correctly, the air should comes from the two sides of the tongue. لازم الهواء يخرج من جانبين اللسان، الله والره، عشان كده لها lateral sounds أو lateral phonemes. في brain lateralization معناها إنه language is lateralized، موجودة في أحد جوانب المخ اللي هو الجانب الأيسر. So we can have, we know from also the different studies where we have the nouns and where we have the word formation and the sentence formation and where we have the verb mediation. In addition, we know also that there are areas, important areas in the brain, which if they are injured or damaged, this will affect the language and the language production and the language skills. منهم منطقة اسمها Broca's area، ودي المنطقة المخصصة أكثر بالpropositions، فالأشخاص اللي عندهم إصابات بحوادث سيارات واضطروا إنهم يعملوا جراحة مخية، فالجزء بتاع بروكا اريا لو انه اتأثر هتلاقيهم بيتكلموا كلام فاقد كل البروبوزيشنز، يقولوا كلامهم من غير بروبوزيشنز لان المنطقة اصيبت هنا. وفيرنكيز اريا منطقة خاصة باستدعاء الكلمات وتذكرها، فالاشخاص اللي عندهم مشكلة في فيرنكيز اريا بيواجهوا حاجة اسمها TOT او التيب اوف ذا تانج. tip of the tongue يعني they try to remember the words, but they call the first phoneme or the first sound of the word but not the complete word. So it is as if at the tip of their tongues. زي ما واحد يقول لك في كلمة كده على طرف لساني بس نسيها، حد يذكرني بيها، فيروحوا ايه يذكروه بيها، فتخيل بقى حياتك كلها تبقى بالشكل ده. علشان خاطر نتأكد ان الكلام ده صحيح، عندنا هنا اكسرسايز بسيط وسريع، وهو انه sometimes we can have a conflict. انتوا شايفين امامكم دلوقتي colors مش كده؟ مين يقول لنا what is the first word؟ يعني who can read؟
yellow, blue, orange, black, red, green.
Okay, great, thank you. What's your name?
رحاب حسني.
Yeah, Rehab. Thank you. I would like you to read, but not what's written. I would like you to read what is colored. يعني ده yellow. Okay. So color,
green.
not the word.
Okay, green, red, purple, yellow, blue.
شوفوا هنا بقى الفكرة. Thank you يا رحاب.
Okay.
In the first round انت اتكلمت بسرعة شديدة yellow, blue, orange, black, red, green. لكن in the second round you hesitated for some time. Why was not as fast? You were not as fast as in the first round because of the left-right conflict between the two brains. يعني ايه الكلام ده؟ يعني in our brains we have two hemispheres, one right hemisphere and one left hemisphere. In the right hemisphere we have the colors. In the left hemispheres we have the names of the colors. So if we are going to read the colors, we are dealing with the right hemisphere because we are dealing with the language only. But if we are looking at the color itself, then we need to look through the right hemisphere of the brain. And because the two brains are in conflict, we find this struggle, we find this kind of difficulty in identifying and having that quickly. فده مثال على أشخاص عاديين ولكن because the language is in the left hemisphere, this is difficult for them to say the color and not the word. بيدوا مثال تاني، لو انك قاعده في مكان وجت زميلتين ليك، 2 زميلات، وكل واحده هتقول لك كلمه سر او جمله سر في ودنك، لكن هيقولوها في نفس اللحظه. واحده هتمسك ودنك اليمين، واحده هتمسك ودنك الشمال، ودي هتقول ودي هتتكلم في نفس اللحظه مع بعض. بعدين هيسالوكي سمعتي ايه؟ في الغالب هتكون سمعتي كويس جدا اللي اتكلمت في الأذن اليمنى، لأن الجسد البشري النص الأيسر من المخ يتحكم في النص الأيمن من الجسم والعكس. فبالتالي اللي سمعتيه في أذنك اليمنى راح مباشرة على النص الأيسر من المخ، وجد اللغة هناك، سمع الكلام وفهمه. لكن الزميلة اللي اتكلمت في الأذن اليسرى لما اتكلمت الكلام راح على النص الأيمن من المخ. النص الأيمن من المخ ما فيهوش لغة، فمضطر إنه يعبر الحاجز ما بين المخين أو ما بين نصين المخ عشان يروح للنص الأيسر. لكن عقبال لما يعمل اللفة دي ويعبر الحاجز يكون الوقت خلص، فتكوني في الأخير ما سمعتيش غير اللي اتقال في الأذن اليمنى مش اللي اتقال في الأذن اليسرى. ودي جربوها في البيت بقى مع بعض، هات إخواتك وخليهم يقولوا الكلام ده وشوف هتظبط ولا لا. But this is just one example of how the TPR tried to move from dependency on verbal language exercises on the left hemisphere to the right hemisphere, which has got the actions and the colors. Okay. The learners in this method respond to the concrete commands. الفصل كله والدرس كله بيكون عبارة عن أوامر موجهة. Commands: do this, instructions: don't do this, stand up, sit down, say this song, with body movements. So the students are moving, making actions, making reactions. طيب وبالنسبة للابستراكت vocabulary زي freedom مثلا وزي important, they are taught through the visual aids if they are available. The teacher should have novelty, creativity, innovation, and the ability to perform the meaningful physical actions. المدرس اللي يقعد على الكرسي بس ويتكلم مش هينفع في الطريقة دي. The teacher should be able to move around, to play, to make actions, in order to minimize the students' stress. And in this method there is no basic textbook. دايما اللي هيستخدم الطريقة دي they do not depend on the textbook, but rather they depend on the situations and the teacher's voice and the gestures, يعني الحركات والإيماءات, and the actions. The advantage of this method is that it ensures better understanding and retention of the linguistic input. بمعنى إن الحكمة الصينية بتقول إذا سمعت أنسى ولكن إذا عملت أتذكر. So as long as you have the hands-on experience and as long as the students do the thing themselves or make the actions themselves, this will give them understanding. يعني لو ان المدرس ما قال ولا شيء غير ستاند اب والطلاب وقفوا سيت داون والطلاب قعدوا، اكيد كلهم فهموا معناتها ايه ستاند اب، معناتها ايه سيت داون. So this gives them retention، يعني احتفاظ باللغة فترات طويلة، بدل ما بيعرف اللغة وينسى الكلمات دي عمره ما هينساها. The actions also maintain their attention and their interest, so the classroom will be fun. The learners will not be forced to speak، لأنه عليه بس إنه to respond physically, not speaking, not verbally. So it is a peaceful atmosphere. ما فيش خوف عليه إنه يغلط ولا إنه يقول حاجة فيها إحراج ليه إذا نطق غلط. عكس الaudio-lingual method, if there are errors that's okay, but the errors will be corrected but at later stages. فلو غلط مش مشكلة, we will correct him or her later, not instantly and not directly. And Also, the moving is from the abstract to the concrete, and this happens gradually based on comprehension. So comprehension is very important, and comprehension is sustained in this method. Right. So these are some of the advantages of the total physical response, or the TPR method. The disadvantages, because everything has advantages and disadvantages, the disadvantages include the teacher dominance. يعني الطريقة دي the teacher is dominant and the central focus, not that student. It doesn't have a textbook. It needs very good preparation and planning. So if the teacher is not talented, it will not be suitable for the students, especially as there are no textbooks. So if there are no textbooks, the teacher is the source of the material to be presented. So it needs long preparation and long planning. It is time consuming because it takes a very long time to prepare, and it takes a long time for the actions around, and it requires roomy classrooms. فلو عندك الفصل مثلا في 10 طلاب وهنعمل action song، هنغني الأغنية مع بعض، لكن الأغنية فيها حركة زي مثلا أغنية بتاعت eyes, head and shoulders, ears and toes and nose، والطفل بيشاور على كل جانب من الحاجات دي في جسمه. ال10 طلاب هيملوا الفصل كله بالحركات، فلو كان الفصل فيه 60 ولا 70 زي فصولنا، يبقى ده مش هيبقى يعني total physical response، ده هتبقى يعني a fighting place. So it requires a roomy classroom. The productive skills اللي هي reading, writing والspeaking بالذات are not emphasized like the listening and actions. Listening هنا واخد جانب كبير جدا أكثر من أي واحد تاني، لكن speaking والwriting are not as emphasized as the skills اللي هي listening بالذات. كمان من ضمن disadvantages that it is not a complete method by itself. في معظم الفصول وفي معظم الدروس المدرس ما بيعتمدش على TPR لوحدها. TPR is a good activity within the classroom, but it is not used alone. دايما بيستخدم معها حاجة تانية زي textbook، زي real updates، زي dialogues علشان يكتمل الفصل. So it is not a complete method by itself, because language is more than just commands. And it will have difficulty, of course, with abstract words, because you cannot just give an action to something that is abstract and not as comprehensible. So this is what we said. It is not a complete method by itself. It has difficulty with concepts. And sometimes it may not suit the shy adults or the rigid teachers. بعض الطلاب خصوصا الادلت students زي ما شفنا في مراكز تعليم اللغات والمعاهد الخاصة، they do not like to repeat, so they will not also like to move along. خصوصا السيدات يعني they will not like to stand up all the time or move around or move their arms and their heads, and sometimes the teachers themselves will not feel comfortable doing that, or thinking that this might be inappropriate, especially in our culture in the Arab world. So this is in